Howdy friends, this is Mrs. Huffman. I'm at home, as I guess you probably are too. And like you, I've had a lot of time on my hands to think about what I can and can't do and what I'm missing. And one of the things I'm really missing is you, of course. I'm missing school and being with you. And when I think about school, one of my favorite times of the day that I really love is story time. And since I can't be with you to read stories with you, I thought I'd read you a story today. For any of you who are in my class or have been in my class, you know that I do love reading stories, and I will often start by saying I want to share with you one of my favorite stories. And it's true, I have a lot of favorite stories, but I do have one that's my absolute favorite book of all time, and that's the story I want to read to you today. But before I read that story, I want to tell you a story about something. About 20 years ago, I was living in Blacksburg, Virginia, and I was out to dinner with my husband Frank and our friends Tom and Cece. And while we were eating dinner, I was telling them a story that had happened to me a few weeks before when I was home at my family's. I was there with my Nana, who at the time was in her mid-90s, and sitting on her lap was my nephew, Bobby. And Bobby and Nana were singing songs and just playing, and at some point, Bobby accidentally knocked Nana's Wiglet onto the ground. And Bobby looked at Nana and looked down at the Wiglet and looked at Nana, and he climbed off her lap and got down and picked up the Wiglet and put it back on her head and tapped her head. And at this point, when I was telling this story to my friend Tom and Cece, Cece looked at me and she said, "A what?" And I said, "A Wiglet." And she said, "A what?" And I said, "A Wiglet." And by now Cece was doing that kind of laugh cry that people do. And she said, "I don't know, what is a Wiglet? Spell it." And I said, W-I-G-L-E-T. She said, "What in the world is a Wiglet? I've never heard of this before." I said, "You know, like a little wig." And she said, "There's no such thing as a Wiglet." And I said, "Well, I don't know, that's what my Nana wears. She wears a Wiglet. And she's always worn a Wiglet, and no one's ever seen her in the Wiglet except for me and my mom. Whenever Nana would come to visit, she would bring 3 dirty Wiglets that she had been wearing, and she would leave them with us. And it was my job as a little girl to wash the Wiglets in hot soapy water with Johnson's baby shampoo. And then I'd comb them out, and my mother would roll them and set them. And when Nana would come to visit, she'd take home the 3 clean and styled Wiglets and leave the old Wiglets with us. Anyways, so Cece just thought this was the funniest thing and was convinced that there was no such thing as a Wiglet. And I said to her, "Well, I really don't know if that's really what it's called, but that's what we call it in my family." So anyways, fast forward about, I don't know, 5 years later, I had moved away from Blacksburg and had then returned back to Virginia and was living here in Charlottesville. And I had been here for about a week, and Cece came to visit me. And while she was staying with me, she said, "I want to show you something." And I said, "Oh, what?" She said, "I brought you something." I said, "What is it?" And she pulled out a copy of a book she was working on. And I read it. And that's what I'm going to read to you today, which is Bee-Wigged by my friend Cece Bell. I do want to thank Candlewick Press for allowing me to read this and record this. So anyways, here goes. I hope you like it.